My name is Craig Bartell. I'm a solutions engineer with Tableau, part of the Salesforce company. And yeah, today we're going to cover Tableau Prep Builder. We've been doing these series kind of through the different components of the Tableau platform, starting with desktop, Prep Builder, and then a collaboration component called Tableau Server, and then some other additional topics that we've rounded up around things like, best practices for dashboard design and how we construct our data sources and other relevant things around those. So that is the plan for today. We're going to be focusing on Tableau Prep Builder, which is the component that helps us prepare and cleanse our data and make it ready for analysis. So that's where we're going to spend all of our time. I'm just going to spend a minute going over this slide at the very beginning, just to kind of ground everybody if you're not familiar with Tableau and what our overall platform looks like. Just a little bit about me too. I've actually been working with the state for the past 6 years now. Actually, when I first started with Tableau 6 years ago, was supporting the state of North Carolina. My background is in business intelligence and analytics. I've been working in the field for 20 plus years, been working with state and local governments pretty much that whole time. So have a lot of experience working with all the different aspects of analytics. And yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and jump in. If you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We don't have we could probably, if I can glance over there and something makes sense at that point, I'll go ahead and try to answer it. Otherwise, we should have time at the end to go ahead and review. So with that in mind, we're going to just start here with a quick overview. So as you can imagine, everything pretty much starts with data, right? We have our data in all of our different data sources, and those can be everything from local, what we call local type, which would be Excel, CSVs, or anything sitting on our desktop or laptop. And then we have all of our other traditional data sources like our databases, like SQL Server and Oracle and DB2 and, you name it, right? And then we have an additional set of resources that might be application related, like they might be in a project management system like Jira. I know some folks use Jira there, or you name it, some other proprietary systems, and then Salesforce and ServiceNow. So data is everywhere, and usually the challenge is we need to get the data, but before we can actually do anything with it, we kind of have to understand the structure of it, right? Is it at the right level of aggregation? Is it first of all, the right data? Do we have the right time frames? Do we need to combine different fields? Do we need to, basically prepare and cleanse the data to make sure we have trust in the data? And then we can move on to that next step. So that's what we're focusing on today. So this step right here, this first Tableau prep step, helps us collect, connect, and clean the data. We will spend just a brief amount of time. I'll show you how it can feed into Tableau Desktop, where we can then do our insight analysis and, of course, create dashboards and charts and graphs and all of that. And then the final step would be how we collaborate and share that content with others in the organization and beyond to the general public. And that would be Tableau Server over here on the right-hand side. So the state has purchased Tableau Server already and made it available to you all as a collaboration platform. So you would publish your content into Tableau Server. Now, there is a complementary component called Tableau Cloud. Tableau Cloud is a hosted and managed cloud environment, software as a service hosted by Tableau and Salesforce. The state currently does not have that. And really it's the same piece of software. It's just basically who manages it. So Kim and her team manage this software. DIT manages this software, and so on. There's a couple other components in here, which we're not going to talk about today, that just are more around how we do, the server and data management. So with that, I'm going to pop right over to, if I can find it here on my desktop. So when you first open up Tableau Prep Builder, you're going to see this screen right here. And what this is showing on the very far left is a connection screen where we would go ahead and click this plus button. And that's really where we select the connector that allows us to connect to whatever data source we're wanting to connect to. And I'll get there in just a second. In the middle, you'll see a bunch of tiles. These represent existing flows that I've already created. So in prep, what we do is we create flows, which, as you can imagine, would be, I take this file, I do something to it, it ends up in this format, and then I want to join it, and then I want to do something else to it. And if you've ever used Tableau before, like Tableau Desktop, you probably realize that in the data source pane, there's only so much that you can do. You can't really do multi-stepped procedures, right? So that's where Prep Builder comes in. We developed Prep Builder because most of our customers had challenges with getting their data in the right format to do analytics. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll see a number of different, help links. So getting started, if you click these, you'll be brought to different videos and resources that allow you to learn about Prep Builder. I do encourage you, if you're new with Prep Builder, to go ahead and look at those, because there's really some good diagrams and videos on how to get going with that. So we're going to work through an example today. It's one that I like using because it's very relevant to literally anybody. I don't have to pick a specific domain of expertise in your organization, but I'm sure at some point everybody has looked at a website to figure out home values and where they might want to find a house, right? So today what we're going to do is we're going to use some data. Let's pretend that I'm moving to the Tampa Bay area in Florida. It just happens to be where I live. And I'm looking at all different types of housing data, which I need to pull down from a website, but I might have to bring it down in multiple files. So that's a challenge for me, right? I might have multiple CSVs, one for each zip code. I want to bring in survey data that looks at things like crime and education and recreation and those transportation, all these different things, and combine that with my data to allow me to have a really good perspective of the moving process or the home search process. So as you can see, I've got data in many different places. So we're going to bring them all together and then try to do some analysis and make sure the data is what I want to use it for. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to come over here and we're first going to start with our survey data. And I can either just click this connect to data, or I can just come over here to this plus sign and I can see that I have all these different file types. And now remember, I was talking about to a file and to a server. So local files would be these, what we consider local, meaning they're on my desktop, like Access, PDF, Spatial. We do support spatial files now in Tableau Prep Builder. So you can join, say, a shape file with another non-geo file. Tableau extract. So if you've already created a Tableau extract or hyperfile, you can bring that in as well, or a CSV text file. Or you see this long list of other connector types. Everything for Databricks, Hadoop, DB2, SQL Server, Salesforce, ServiceNow, etc. So these are the places that you would go to connect to your data. Now, we're going to keep things simple today. I'm actually going to just pull in first the survey data, and I happen to have that in an Excel file. So I need to go find that. Let's see here. I need to have it in my, I got to search for it. So let's see, I got some areas where I have geospatial demos. There it is, survey data by zip code. So I'm going to open that up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to begin the process of creating a data flow. Okay. Now what this first thing is doing here is it's showing me this node. This is the data node, and there's information about this data node, right? Like, how do I want to access it? Do I want to have multiple union tables? We'll do this in the next step, right? How do I want to sample the data? Because when you're dealing with millions of rows of data, we're not going to read in every single row to do this data definition process. When we actually do the actual run of the data to create our data set or output data set of the flow, we will read every single row, but I just wanted to mention that. So for right now, we're connecting to this particular file. Now, when I have a flow, I can add these different types of nodes. I can add what's called a clean step. You'll see that in just a second. It's a way of kind of allowing me to profile, excuse me, my data. I can create new dummy rows of data. So this is really helpful if you're missing rows and you want to create some kind of padded rows of data. You can do aggregation steps to aggregate data up to a higher level. You can do pivoting. I'm going to be showing you pretty much all of these at some point. And of course, we can join, we can union, we can create a script. Now, that script could be, for example, a Python script where we've already written some Python, and we take in maybe a parameter and do some projections or whatever on it, and then we return it back as a data set. And then there's also something called Einstein predictions. So in our Salesforce platform, we have a component called Einstein Analytics, which allows us to do predictive, kind of more black box type predictive analytics. And then, of course, I'd want to output this to a different format, right? So that's what we're going to do here. And the first thing I'm going to do is going to add a clean step on here. Now, this is one of the things, just even stopping here, if this is all you do with Tableau Prep Builder, this is really valuable to help me understand what my data looks like. What is the shape and distribution of my data? Like, for example, we can see as we look at each one of these columns that I've got different data types. We see up here ABC, ABC, and I see a row ID as a number. Well, that's interesting because in some cases I may want to, change or massage this data, right? Like the row ID necessarily, I don't need it to be a number, right? Because I'm not going to add it or anything. I could make it maybe change it to a string value if I wanted. So every one of these columns gets typed as it's brought in. Gender you see is string. But let's look at this column, for example, and you see that it's saying there are 51% of the records are, and by the way, this is survey data this is generic, very random, totally generated survey data for my area is just kind of dummy data. And we can see that the breakdown in rows, but represented by both the number and the bar, is the kind of the profile of that data. And then you can see in the column for recreation, the first question about recreation, there were probably more 9s as responses than 10s, etc. So this is a great way to, first of all, get familiar with your data. We now see zip code here. You can see which zip codes responded more than others. So, and then down below here in the bottom section, you get the row level detail. So this is the actual data sitting in those rows. So for example, if I wanted to just narrow down and see, and again, this is from a data preparation process, I see that I want to see all female rows that selected 1 for recreation. And as I scroll, you see how it's narrowing down here on the bottom. So I can do a spot check. Let's say maybe I wanted to see all that answered 1 for recreation and education. I only have 6 rows or 5 rows. So again, it's a great tool for being able to, spot check my data. And then, of course, you can do this at any point along the way. Now, you see this little thing in the middle of the screen called recommendations. It's actually because again, Tableau understands things like geospatial. It knows that there's a zip code field. So it's saying, hey, do you want me to validate this zip code to a valid zip code table? So it's saying, yeah. And it's also in the process going to say, all right, are these invalid values, right? Because they don't exist in a real true zip code database, right? So it will, in fact, flag those as, say, invalid values for a legitimate zip code, right? We also could do email. It's saying change the data role to email to make sure we validate it that it's in the proper form of an email. So again, and this is really pretty cool. So as we move into the age of AI, what you'll see in our very next release is another box up here, which is going to be a way that you can search for example, conversion algorithms to say, I need to convert this from a date to a whatever, or from a non-date field to a date field, or I need to parse off the year of the date field. And it'll create some code here real quickly for you to do that. So AI, as you know, you probably heard, I'm sure you've heard about AI. I laugh. But it's being infused into all different aspects of our product, including Prep Builder, as you'll see here. All right, so we're going to continue down the process of figuring out things. Now, remember, I have response level data. So this data for surveys is at the level of individual respondent. I'm not going to care about each individual respondent for my comparison with when I'm looking at homes. So I'd like to aggregate things up. But the first thing I need to do is, if you notice over here, I've got survey data. I've got my responses in a bunch of columns. I could potentially have 100 different columns. I don't want to have to make 100 different, say, formula fields to track the values of my different responses. So I'm going to pivot these 5 columns into basically 2 columns, the values and the question value. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and I'm going to add a pivot. And over here, you'll notice that I can do both columns to rows and rows to columns. So we can support them both ways. And this is pivoting is a concept that can kind of, you know, blow your mind if you're not really familiar with it. But traditionally, like in survey data, it's common that you could have hundreds and hundreds of different responses to columns, but you don't really want to. They might be additive. They might be related to each other. So what we want to do is we want to be able to pivot them so that we can get a better analysis of that question. So I'm going to take these. You see now the screen has changed for this node, this pivot node, and I'm going to find the different columns I want to pivot, and I'm going to drag them over here into this drop zone that says pivoted fields. Now you notice automatically it has now created 2 new columns out of those 5. One is called pivot names. So I'm going to rename that questions. So now I've got my questions as individual values, right? You see them down here, the question. And then I see the Q, which was the actual, it just kind of abbreviated that. I'm going to say answers. I could spell it. Wow, bad this morning. There you go. So I've got my question and answers. Now, what did it do? You see, for every individual row, it now created 5 separate rows. Okay, right? Everybody see that? So that's part of the pivoting process, right? When you pivot from columns to rows, you're going, since I had 5 columns, I'm going to get 5 individual rows, but now I have 1 column that I can interrogate and use in my data rather than have to create a very complicated if statement. If Q1 equals this and Q2 equals this and Q3 equals that. So anyway, now I mentioned that we wanted to aggregate this. So I don't really care about the individual. So I'm going to next add an aggregation step. And in that aggregation step, very similarly, you see we have 2 different fields, what's grouped and what's aggregated. So I'm going to say at the level of gender, question, and zip code, I want to group that level or aggregate that. What is it that I want to aggregate? Well, I want to aggregate the answer. So I'm going to drag that over here. And I don't want a sum. It just kind of defaults to sum. I'm going to make it an average. So that's saying now, if you look down at the data down here, and I could do this another way, actually. I could come up here and I could put a clean step on, and I could say, well, what does that data look like? Okay. You see that each row is now the question and the zip at the level of zip code, gender, and question. So the average value of 6.75 is for the question on healthcare for males in this zip code, right? That's perfect. That's what I want. So now I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to say this is my survey data. I can document this. I can also come in here and I can add a description. I could say this is the aggregated value, values for. And the reason that I'm doing this is now I'm documenting my flow. If somebody else, let's say you leave DIT and somebody else has to pick up this flow, somebody's going to know why you did this at this step, right? So that's kind of one step. Now, okay, I'm going to continue on here in the interest of time, and we're going to now look at the listing data. So I need to bring in other data. I'm going to add over here. Now, this happens to be in CSV format. So where is that CSV format? It's in, let's see here. I have listing prep, 24 data. All right, so you see I've got a whole bunch of CSVs. Well, I don't want to have to manually drag all of those in. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to pick one. Now, what has it done? And let me move the screen down a little bit here to show you. So there's our original, let me bring this up a little bit. There's our original kind of flow as it was to this point, and I've brought in another data source. Now in this data source, you look at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead first. Now, I will point out this. So many times you have what I call highly formatted Excel data. Like you've got a bunch of rows that are just simply text values explaining what you have. So many times you need to like say, well, just ignore the first 5 rows, or, start at whatever row, right? Data start row is blank, right? What are my field separators in a delimited file? Is it the comma? Is it the exclamation point? What is it, right? But then if I come over to this tab, I'm going to say union multiple files. And I'm going to say, well, what do I want a union on? I want a union based on file name or file folder. So I can enter the pattern, which is Redfin. That is the company or the company's website that I downloaded. And it just so happens that these files, as you see at the bottom of the screen, those were all the ones that it's going to include if I click this apply button. So now it's included anything starting with Redfin as its value. So this is a way you can pull in multiple files. And to make sure that those are what I've expected, I'm going to just put a clean step on. Remember, the clean step is always a good first bet for understanding what data I have in my data source. So let's take a look at this now, and let's talk about maybe cleansing some of the data. So we see we've got a nice wide data set. We've got address, city, zip, price, of course, number of beds, baths, square footage, what year it was built, how many days on market, all this great home data that I can analyze now alongside my survey data. So, but maybe some of the data is not in the right format. Like, for example, maybe I have, like in this case, you see I've got a multifamily 2 to 4 unit and a multifamily 5+ unit, but I don't really care about those. I want to just combine them into one called multifamily. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to come over here to this little ellipsis, and you see I've got a whole bunch of different things. I can do filtering, I can do cleansing, I can do grouping, I can split values, doing custom splitting to split a field into multiple columns, and so on. So in my case, we're going to do a group, and I'm going to do it based on manual selection. So when that happens, what it's saying is, when I click on multifamily, and then over here on the right-hand side, say, include in that whatever I'm selecting. So it's saying combine those two into one, and I'm going to click done. And then you see this little paperclip icon. So this is a really cool way to visually group things. If you wanted to group multiple things together, you can do that. And this is not changing your source data, by the way. Again, this is just purely doing this virtually within Tableau Prep Builder. And then what I might want to do is I might want to remove this 2 to 4 unit. So I'm just going to double click that and overtype the values to say this is now multifamily, right? Because we combine those two together. Now, just in case you're wondering what did I do and when, I can open this little changes window, and this is going ahead and telling me what I did, so, in order of what I did, so that I can see and change in the future if I need to change or add or do whatever. So for example, if I need to edit this and add another multifamily type, I could do that right here. And let's say, moving on to the address field, let's say that I don't want any punctuation in my addresses. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say clean and make all the, remove any punctuation. So it does that. It removes any asterisks or dashes or things like that. Now you also see that I've got, different values here for the city. That looks okay. I'm going to go ahead and leave those as is. But you get the idea, right? I can now go ahead and go through and cleanse my data, right? So this is the process of going through and cleansing. So now that we have our cleansed data for our listings, I'm just going to add a little note here and say this is our listings. And now what I'd like to do is join the two together at the level of zip code, right? So the way that I do that is I just take and grab this node and I drop it on top of the other node. And you see now I get these two little boxes that show up when I hover over it saying join or union. That's the way you can manually, in my case, I'm going to do a join. So I'm going to drop it on that join box. And you see it very conveniently gives me a nice little box saying join, but I get this little asterisk. Oh yeah, okay, I have to have at least one join clause. So now there's a little helper over here in my dialog window saying, all right, let's go ahead and add one. Well, I want to have the zip code equal the zip code, right? And now what's cool is you see this little Venn diagram below saying this is what you've asked for. You've got an inner join of the survey and the listing data, which represents 180 rows that were included from the survey. There's 915 excluded from that. There's 1,500 on the listings included and 14 excluded. Now, again, knowing the data and just again, in the case, just so you know, I had additional zip codes that were not in that any of the listings. So there were rows that wouldn't be included as part of the join. It's highlighting those for me here in red. Okay. So that's pretty nice. So now I see that I've got my zip codes matching and I get a join result of 15,000 rows, right? That is my result set. And now again, if I want, I can put a clean step on the end of that to look at our combined data set. And now we can see that we've got survey data along with the level of detail. Now again, remember, we have 5 rows for every zip code for that particular zip code and set of questions. So we have to keep that in consideration later on when I do my calculations in my visualization. So now, now that we've got our combined data here, let's just kind of take a look. We got 16,000 rows. What we can also now do before I output this data is I can spot check it within Tableau Desktop. So to do that, and we're not going to spend much time on desktop, but I just want to show you, if you right click on here, it says preview in Tableau Desktop. So it's actually running my data to this point, and it's opening a new session with Tableau Desktop, which I'm just going to need to flip over to, let me find it. I have to start it up here. Give me 1 second. Desktop got cluttered. Let me see if I can get desktop to start up here. There it is. Sorry, it was off the screen. All right. So what it did now was that there was all the fields that were generated from my data flow that I created. So to spot check, let me just drag, and you see that zip code has a little globe next to it. So it knows that it's a geographic type field. So as I drag zip code in here, you see it plotted it on a map. This is classic Tableau, where now Tableau is saying, okay, you asked for zip codes, so I'm going to put them on a map view rather than a list of zip codes, for example. That's one of the hallmarks of the way that Tableau was designed to work, to help you, the end user analyst, to make things easier. And now let's just say, for example, I wanted to know what is the average price for each one of those. And I'm going to drag that over and say, give me the average price by zip code. So as you hover over this one, wow, 700K. Man, I tell you, I was joking that I did this demo 2 years ago, and these values were literally about half of what they were now. So our price appreciation in this area, these are actually real listing values as of about a month ago. So you can see that, let's say, for example, I want a lower priced home. I want to look in this area. I want to, this is my price point. I'm looking at around 700K for these, right? So you can see very quickly, yes, this is giving me the data that I want. If I want to, for example, now let's look at maybe the respondent survey data for each zip code, because I'm concerned about crime. I'm going to create another sheet here. And what I'm going to do is first I'm going to drag in the answers. Now, again, I said I'm not really going to do a demo on Tableau. I'm not going to go deep dive demo, but this is kind of how Tableau works. We use these drop zones. So the average value of the answers is a 5.57, but I need to get it to the level of question. So let's find our question value. There it is, questions. I'm going to drag it to columns, and you see that these are the different questions. I'm going to pivot these so they look a little better. You can see, and toggle on the labels, you can see the average values for these for all zip codes now. Now, one of the cool things about Tableau is I can now use this visualization right in this other one here and overlay it in this this little hover tooltip. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come over here, and right below it, I'm going to say insert that sheet, and I didn't bother to rename it, but Let's make the max height a little bit wider so we can see it. Now, when I hover over each zip code, you see I'm getting for that one, right? Like for this zip code, which, wow, the average price is 2 million bucks. This is a really exclusive area. I think these are farmland and ranches, but you can see the different values for the surveys. So if I'm really concerned about healthcare, this one has a very nice high value for healthcare. Very low values over here in this zip code. This is all fake data, by the way, so don't really read too much into it. But that's how it works. So now, yes, I can kind of confirm this is the whole reason that I now brought it into Tableau desktop was to validate that this in fact is the data that I want to use for my data conversion effort. So let me just pause for a second. I'm going to look over here and I see questions that come in here. Yeah, thanks. Henry answered one of them. When you cover join types, inner, outer, would you be able to explain join clauses in data prep, like greater than equal, or when joining or two more? I understand equal, but others are kind of abstract to me. All right, let's go back to Tableau Prep Builder. And let's find our join right here. Okay, right. So this particular join, you see right here, let me go back, right? So I first clicked on my join node. And first of all, of course, you have your different join types. If folks aren't really that familiar with what does it mean, basically it's what is the overlap here, right? Is the overlap. And right now I'm only getting ones that are matching based on zip codes matching. So if you had a survey zip code that didn't match the listing one, it would not appear in my output data set. But if you're in this range, or really any of these, as far as how you do them, you can specify that maybe you want this to only be for certain values greater or less than the others, the listings zip code. And again, that I don't use that a ton, frankly, but if you have a very specific join scenario, yes, absolutely, you can do this. But that's how that works. So you can specify the join parameters specifically right in the join area there. Excellent, thank you. So now what do I do? So I've got a working data flow. So what I'd like to now do is publish this data flow. So actually, I didn't mention this really at the beginning, but as a component of the Tableau server environment, right? If I go back to my slide over here, this on the right-hand side where your collaboration environment is, you can actually publish these flows into Tableau server with a component that you have in your environment called data management, and it's called Prep Conductor. Prep Conductor is a scheduler that basically runs these prep flows on a schedule and creates those data sources for you and automates them so that you don't have to manually keep running them. And I really didn't highlight this earlier, but actually, let me cover it now. We didn't really construct an output data set for our flow. So we're going to do that now. And you see that output node, this is showing me all of the output data that is a result of my flow here. And now I can decide where I want to put it, and do I want it one of these different types of data types, a published data source. That means it's going to put it into Tableau server as a published Tableau data source, right? Just understand that. Or it could be a local file here. I just want to put it back onto my laptop as a file, or I could put it in a database table. If I click that, I will get a logon to, say, SQL Server or whatever my chosen database is, and I can write it back to that database table. CRM Analytics, that is the Salesforce version of Analytics. I'm really not going to talk too much about that today, but it is a solution that came from Salesforce prior to the acquisition of Tableau as a data. Now, it's putting it out there as a CRM Analytics data set, or a new component called Salesforce Data Cloud, which is an environment that allows you to leverage kind of a common data model for sales and service related type data sets out there in your environment. This would be applicable if, in fact, say you had Salesforce, for example, as a data CRM environment, and other types of things around, say, e-commerce and service and marketing and those sorts of things. All right, I'm going to stick locally here to file, and then I would specify the location that I wanted the output file. I would give it a name, and then I would tell it what format I wanted it in. Here you see there's 3 types supported. We can either have it be a hyperfile, which we recommend because it's highly performant, or an Excel or a CSV. And then, of course, the refresh option. Do I want it to append, which will keep adding to an existing one, or create it new each time by replacing it and creating a new version of it? All right, now what do we do with this flow? How do we get it into Tableau server? What I'm going to do now is I need to sign in. That was one thing I didn't have a chance to do before. We're going to go ahead and go into our good old Tableau cloud environment. Oops, sorry, I clicked that too fast. Tableau Cloud, and then Tableau, I basically now have to log in with my credentials. Yours would look very similar, but you are in fact using Tableau Server. And we have to do our multi-factor authentication. So I'm just doing that on my phone here. And voila. Now you're going to see a dialog box that's going to say, where do I want to put this data flow? And we should be good. And now we should hopefully see a dialog box window open in another browser, which I have to find on my desktop here. Where did it go? Oh, I'm sorry. That just signed me in. I got to get back in the swing here. So now I'm going to publish. So I did sign in, but now I want to sign in and publish that flow. So once I've been established as a valid user, now I pick the project that I want to log that into. And you see we've got all these different folders here. And this is a working environment that I have for workshops. So you can see a multiple set of different file folders, but I would like to put it in this data sources folder. And I'm going to give it a name like, this is the listings flow demo for NCDIT. And then you can see I have different connections. Now this is required when I have different file types because it has to know how it's going to connect to the data, right? So in this case, how is it going to connect? And in this case, I'm just going to merely upload it as part of the data flow. So let's go ahead now and you can ignore this at the bottom. With Tableau Online, we have to use another component called Tableau Bridge, which you don't have to use in your environment. So I'm going to flip over now and log into my Tableau cloud environment. And we'll look at what that would look like. Now I'm in what this screen should look almost identical to what you're like within your server environment. When you log into your server environment, it should look something like this. So now I'm actually in Tableau server. I'm going to go ahead and search. I know I've got a listings and surveys flow. So when I publish it, it should look exactly like that. And really what I'm showing you here is this is really just the simple final step of publishing it into Tableau server. And then I can create a schedule. So you can see the last time this was run on February 6th, it was successful. But I'm going to create a new task maybe and define a new schedule. And I want that schedule to be every, daily at certain times of the day, blah, 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 right? So this is how I set up a schedule for it to run. And then once I initiate this schedule, really it's hands off from this point, right? It's going to run, it's going to create the output file, and that will be available to me. Now, in case it wasn't intuitively obvious, now you're saying, that's interesting. All right, you created something on the desktop, you created a flow, that flow created a data source, and now that data source is actually going to live up on Tableau server. And that's right, because now think of these data sources that you're creating as curated data sources. Now you've spent the time and effort to create a data source which others can use. So now care for it and put it out there and allow others in your organization to use it as trusted data so that now this is where kind of the administration side of it comes in. As an administrator in your agency, each agency pretty much has their own site within Tableau server at the state there. You may want to have a plan for all the different file folders. These are things that site administrators are all briefed on and are aware of. But if you're not sure in your organization who the site administrator is, Kim can help you find that person. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to set parameters for what your file folders are going to look like, where you're going to put things, what the standards are within the state environment, and so on. And then once you do that, now you're off and running. You're going to create these flows, put them into the respective folders. Now, when you start using desktop and the other components of our platform, you'll be able to leverage these data sources for creating, insights and dashboards and everything else. So that kind of completes the circle for the demo. I will mention, remember, this is kind of the front end of the process. We actually did a desktop webinar about 2 weeks ago. We do have the recordings for those, and we do repeat this schedule every couple weeks with new topics. So, we kind of cycle back through these topics: prep, desktop, server, best practices, data, data sources, and so on. If you have any questions as individuals in your organization, please reach out to Kim, reach out to myself. Probably the best thing to do first would be reach out to Kim and her organization when you have questions, just because she knows the environment there. She may be able to head off other questions, but I work hand in hand with Kim and the team.
I'm not sure. Can you hear me? I had my hand raised. Okay, so my question is this. You're talking about the joining of the data, and in this case, we're using zip codes in Florida. What is your best practice recommendation that if you get access to either new data, let's say you pulled a data set that was 2 months old and a new one has come out, or a corrected one has come out, can you just drop? I can't remember if you can allow this process to drag and drop on top of the existing data. And then also about your best way to join if you get another tier of data, if they want to add into comparison data for the next county over or whatever, that's not including your data set. Just as you were using the joining, I was thinking, my thing is you never just get one set of data. Something always gets updated. And sometimes it's just my fear of when you do updates, sometimes you can override or knock out good data. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so let me go back to, I think there were a couple of questions in there. I'm going to go back to this. So let me like in this one here with the Redfin data, when you specify that you want it to match based on, you're going to get this list showing you which of the files have actually been included, right? And what happens a lot of times is, and I see this more often than not, like let's say that you have a file folder that some process drops a new file into this folder, every week or every night or every month or whatever it is, right? So it needs to rerun this process, which it would do where you now are pulling in these new values. So it's automatically going to pick up the new file as this. Now, the second part of yours was like, do I know, is it correct in what it did? Did it duplicate the data? Blah, blah, blah. Well, that's why you have prep, right? If you're concerned about that, you would come in here, open the flow, and spot check your data, right? That's the huge value of prep, is being able to now spot check and say, oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't have, if I look up here, I've got 1,000 rows that are coming in, right? If I see 10,000 here and I'm like, whoa, what happened? Why did I bring in 10,000 rows? And then you find that, you've got way too many. If I go over here to zip code, this one over here, let's say zip code 333 whatever. Well, actually, I can actually do individual values here. I can say detail. Let's see, this one here doesn't have as many, and I would have expected I would have gotten a lot more, right? That's kind of the whole point. Is that kind of answer what you were talking about?
Yes, it does. But it does ability to spot check for data that possibly could be duplicated by mistake or brought in incorrectly. For instance, if you needed a different zip code and you gotta, you shouldn't include that data. So it's a way to check it. My other concern was overriding of files, because it's a file. I'm trying to remember because I'm not as familiar with Tableau, but been working with it a little bit, and because we recently got it. My thing is for instance, file names. They've updated it, and will it know that the file has been updated, but it may not necessarily be correct? How do you consider that's, you can spot check what you want, but if the file is corrupt in the naming sequence, for instance, it should be a different name or something like that, and override it. It's just, is there a way
Yeah,
that you
well,
the history and roll it back? I'm just curious.
yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, right? Like you would either, if the file name were different, like it wouldn't pick it up because it's like looking for, well, it's this one here. Like if somebody, accidentally didn't call it Redfin, but called it REDDFIN or something, and it wasn't going to pick that up, then again, you wouldn't necessarily know it other than having looked and checked to see. Or if you got an error, if you actually, I remember at the beginning you saw a little triangle, a red triangle, because it didn't find something. It didn't find the join. I hadn't created it yet or something like that. It'll let you know, but those are more errors than anything, right? Like you just have something that it's not, like the data source can't be found or something like that. It's going to give you an error when trying to connect. Other than that, I don't know how else you'd be able to, other than having an ongoing kind of process where you spot check the data to make sure that, control totals or that sort of thing, the values are coming out the way you should.
Just for quick reference, date modified, date created. So for instance, if someone resaved the Redfin 33/5/10 again, that one would have a different date versus the others, just to make sure and not the original full date.
Yeah, that's the date created of like the file itself. That's just pulling in the system stuff, right?
And I'm just saying that's one way that I'm thinking to check. Let's say if someone
Oh,
missed
right. Yeah. Yep.
renamed on top of a file, I can say, well, where this one come from? It had the right name, but the date is a totally different date. The others.
Yeah, and actually just so you know too, let me go back to like the clean here. I think there is a, when you do a file join, it will retain the source file that it came from. Let me go back here and see if I can find it. Might be all the way here at the file paths. Yeah, see here? So it's actually trailing, it's adding that to the data so that it knows where it came from. And you would be able to know that or spot check that as well. That's a handy little thing to be able to use if you need to for some calculation numbers or whatever. Yeah, and again, if you're having challenges and we need to work one off on this, happy to do that. Try to figure out, what works best for your environment. That's kind of the other thing with, you see, we've got a team of people. You've got Kim and her group, and also the Tableau sales team that's there to help you out as well. So, lean on us where appropriate. Thanks again for joining. And if you have any further questions, please get a hold of us. Like I said, Kim is probably the best source to start with, and then she can put you in touch with the sales team here. And very good. Enjoy your day.